Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. The Indian occupying forces have martyred two more unarmed Kashmiri civilians in illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The two Kashmiri youth were killed during a military crackdown in the Bijbehara area of the Anantnag district. Indian occupation troops have killed over 300 Kashmiris since New Delhi revoked the valley's special status in August last year. A group of 7 Tory member parliaments have relaunched a group named the Conservative Friends of Kashmir, aimed at campaigning for self-determination in Kashmir. In a statement, the group said they advocate to end human rights abuses in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. They rejected the severe criticism from pro-India members of the Tory party. The United States has imposed new sanctions on 2 Iranian individuals and 4 entities. The target list includes Iranian judges, Shiraz Revolutionary Court, and many prisons. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said all designated individuals and entities are responsible for gross violations of human rights. North Korea has expressed regret over the killing of a South Korean citizen, saying he was killed to contain the potential spread of coronavirus. In a briefing, Seoul's national security advisor says North Korea's Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un sent a letter to South Korean President Moon Jae-in to apologize for the incident, saying he hopes the confidence between the two sides is not damaged. The global cases of coronavirus have exceeded 32 million and claimed over 980,000 lives. The outbreak continues to overwhelm India as another 1,141 people have died in the past 24 hours, while over 86,000 have tested positive. The country's death toll has crossed 92,000 mark with over 5.8 million infections. In Pakistan, 7 COVID-19 patients died overnight, taking the tally to 6,444. And Bayern Munich have won the UEFA Super Cup, beating Sevilla 2-1 after extra time at the Puskás Arena in Hungary. With the Super Cup win, the UEFA Champions League winners completed a quadruple, winning the domestic league and cup double season last season. News in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. We start our news bulletin from illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, where the occupation forces have martyred 2 more unarmed civilians. The 2 Kashmiri youths were killed during a military crackdown in the Bijbehara area of the Anantnag district. Indian occupation troops have killed over 300 Kashmiris since New Delhi revoked the valley's special status in August last year. The occupied valley is under India's crushing curfew and communications blackout for the last 417 days. Now, a group of 7 Tory member parliaments have relaunched a group named the Conservative Friends of Kashmir, aimed at campaigning for self-determination in Kashmir. In a statement, the group said they advocate to end human rights abuses in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The group of British parliamentarians includes Paul Bristow, James Daly, Jack Brennerton and Steve Baker. They represent constituencies with significant Pakistani populations. The MPs rejected the severe criticism from pro-India members of the Tory party. President of Azad Kashmir, Masood Khan, has expressed gratitude over the relaunching of the Conservatives' Friends of Kashmir. Now, ambassadors, diplomats and defence attaches of 24 countries visited Pakistan's side of the line of control. State media reported that the delegation met with the victims of India's ceasefire violations. The diplomats were told that Indian troops intentionally target civilians in unprovoked firing. This report has more.
Indian troops have committed over 2,300 ceasefire violations this year so far. During the visit of envoys from 24 countries, Director General of Pakistan Military's media wing said the Indian Army used cluster ammunition along the line of control. He said Indian forces are deliberately targeting the civilian population, which is in violation of the Geneva Convention and international laws. Following the visit, Turkish Ambassador Ehsan Mustafa Yerdakul said the Kashmir dispute must be resolved as per the resolutions of the UN Security Council.
I would only repeat what my president, Mr. Erdogan, Turkish president, has 2 days ago put in front of the whole world in the UN General Assembly, that Kashmir issue is a burning issue and there should be a solution to this issue within the line of UN Security Council resolutions.
Iranian Deputy Ambassador Ali Mohammad Surkabi expressed Tehran's solidarity with the Kashmiri people.
Many things that is happening in Kashmir, inshallah, that Kashmir is solved. We are supported the people of the Kashmir every day.
Pakistan has repeatedly summoned senior Indian diplomats to register its strong protest over New Delhi ceasefire violations. The violations often result in serious injuries and martyrdom of innocent civilians. The trip of the foreign dignitaries is in stark contrast to India banning foreign ambassadors as well as the UN's observers from visiting on its side of the LOC.
Well, moving on now, Afghan security forces say they have killed over 60 Taliban fighters in the eastern Paktika province. A police spokesman, Shah Mohammed, said the group staged coordinated assaults on the Vazakhwa district police headquarters. He said Afghan forces repelled the attacks and launched airborne and counter-offensive. The spokesman said 3 policemen were killed while 6 others sustained injuries. The Taliban have not yet commented. However, the group did claim responsibility for killing Paktika's security chief and his 8 guards last week. Now, the United States says it will welcome talks with Iran on ending the long-running conflict in Afghanistan. Speaking at a virtual event, U.S. envoy Zalmay Khalilzad said Tehran wants to entangle Washington in its longest war. Khalilzad warned that the U.S. will target any Iran-backed groups taking action against Washington's interests. He said Washington is paying a high price in Afghanistan without winning or losing. The envoy said U.S. has offered Iranians to meet on this issue and discuss the future of Afghanistan. He said Washington was monitoring groups aligned with Iran very closely. Meanwhile, the United States has imposed new sanctions on 2 Iranian individuals and 4 entities. In a statement, the U.S. Treasury Department said the target list includes Iranian judges who sentenced a wrestler, Naveed Afkari, on September 12th. The list also includes Shiraz Revolutionary Court and many prisons in the country. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said all designated individuals and entities are responsible for gross violations of human rights. He accused the Iranian government of transforming its system of justice into a cruel system of repression. Iranian authorities had charged 27-year-old Iranian wrestler Naveed Afkari with killing a security guard during the 2018 protest in Iran. Moving on, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Moscow hopes to take new measures to maintain the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. In a joint press conference with Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, Lavrov said Russia is cooperating with the participants who adhere to the deal. Lavrov said Moscow will not take into account the illegal and unacceptable unilateral actions by Washington. He said the United States sanctions against Iran will not influence Russia's policy on Iran. Meanwhile, Zarif said both countries have had productive talks on military cooperation. He said the 2 countries can also sign a military contract after Iran's arms embargo is lifted. Iran's Revolutionary Guards have unveiled a new naval base near the Strait of Hormuz. State media quoted the Guard's commander as saying the base has been built to control the entry and exit of naval vessels at the entrance to the Gulf. Major General Hussein Salami said this location is one of the country's most strategic defensive points. His remarks come days after a U.S. aircraft carrier passed the waterway to enter the Gulf. In June last year, Iran shot down a U.S. drone over the strait after it allegedly violated its airspace. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign ministry described Saudi King Salman bin Abdul Aziz's accusations as baseless. In his video addressed to the UN General Assembly, the king said Iran exploited a 2015 nuclear deal with world powers to intensify its expansionist activities. Now, the two biggest Palestinian factions, Fatah and Hamas, have agreed to hold the first elections in Palestine in nearly 15 years. The polls will be scheduled within 6 months under a deal agreed by Fatah, the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. The factions renewed reconciliation efforts after Israel reached diplomatic accords this month with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. The development dismayed Palestinians and prompted their leaders to try to present a united front. Officials from both groups held meetings in Istanbul for the past 2 days. They said the vote will be in stages, starting with parliament, then electing a new president, and finally choosing members of the Palestine Liberation Organization. The rivals have been unable to repair a rift from 2007 when Hamas seized control of the Gaza Strip. Now, Bahrain says normalization deal with Israel should lead to end Palestinian-Israel conflict through a two-state solution. Addressing the UN General Assembly, King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa called for intensified efforts to end the conflict in the Middle East. King Hamad said the issue should be resolved through Arab peace initiatives to establish an independent Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital. He said the declaration to establish relations with Israel is a refined message that Bahrain wants fair and comprehensive peace. Hamad's remarks comes a day after an Israeli official delegation made the first visit to Bahrain since both countries signed the deal. The Palestinian Authority says it has suffered a 70% drop in foreign aid in 2020 after a 50% drop last year. Officials say the recent normalization deals between the Gulf and Israel have led to the sharp decline in financial support from Arab states to Palestine. The Palestinian Finance Ministry in Ramallah says it has received no funds from Arab countries since March. Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki said most Arab countries didn't pitch any in the $100 million pledged in the Arab summit. Arabs' aid during the same period dropped by 85% from $265 million in 2019 to $38 million in 2020. Moving on, the U.S. has announced more than $720 million in additional humanitarian assistance for Syria. The U.S. Agency for International Development said recent support brings the total amount of aid to Syria to more than $12 billion since 2011. It said USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance will provide urgently needed food, shelter, medical care, and will support Syrians earn income. The agency said this assistance will bolster coordination and information management for the overall humanitarian response in Syria. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said international community must remain committed to meeting the increasing needs of the Syrian people. He called for holding the Bashar al-Assad regime accountable for its devastating military campaign and brutal disregard for human rights. Now, 2 civilians have been killed and 12 others wounded in a car bomb attack in northeastern Syria. Turkey's Ministry of National Defense accused the PKK terrorists of detonating a bomb-laden car in the town of Tal Halaf. Turkey's military conducted Operation Peace Spring in northeastern Syria to clear it from the PKK militants. Ankara said the operation was launched to secure Turkey's borders. Now, North Korea has expressed regrets over the killing of a South Korean citizen, saying he was killed to contain the potential spread of coronavirus. In a briefing, Seoul's National Security Advisor says North Korea's Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un sent a letter to South Korean President Moon Jae-in to apologize for the incident, saying it hopes the confidence between the two sides is not damaged. South Korea's national security advisor says Kim apologized for disappointing President Moon and other South Koreans. Pyongyang says its troops near the Western Sea border fired over 10 shots against the man intruding into the North's water. It says the border forces burned the floating material carrying the man after his body disappeared. Earlier, South Korea's defense ministry said it was tightening its military readiness posture in the wake of the killing. Seoul said the military is closely monitoring North's troops' movements to swiftly react to any aggression and to prevent the escalation of tensions. More news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. The global cases of coronavirus have exceeded 32 million and claimed over 980,000 lives. The COVID-19 outbreak continues to overwhelm India as another 1,141 have died in the past 24 hours, while over 86,000 people have tested positive. The country's death toll has crossed 92,000 mark with over 5.8 million infections. In Pakistan, 7 COVID-19 patients died overnight, taking the tally to 6,444. Meanwhile, Brazil has reported 831 deaths overnight as the country's death toll nears 140,000. Elsewhere, Britain has introduced new restrictions to contain the spread of rising COVID-19 infections. The U.S. state of California says it has contained about half of a massive wildfire ravaging Los Angeles County for nearly a month. Authorities say the Bobcat fire has burnt about 113,000 acres outside Los Angeles. Officials said the largest fire in Los Angeles County history held steady overnight, with about 1,600 personnel currently leading the containment efforts. The Forest Service warned of more hot, dry weather over the weekend that may set back the progress bringing the Bobcat fire under control. The 2020 fire season in the United States has killed 26 people in California since August 15, while 10 have died in Oregon and Washington. Authorities say roughly 3.6 million acres have burned in California since the beginning of the year, with another 2 million acres in Washington and Oregon. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees has called for urgent action to improve living conditions for asylum seekers on Greece's Aegean island. The agency called on Europe to continue supporting Greece by offering relocation places for the most vulnerable refugees. The UNHCR lauded Athens for establishing an emergency facility to shelter those displaced from the Moria camp. It said around 9,400 asylum seekers left homeless by the fire are now residing in the new government-run site. The United Nations agency estimates that at least 4,000 people on all islands are eligible to be transferred to mainland immediately. On 10th of September, the Moria Reception and Identification Center was burned, forcing some 12,000 people onto the streets. In business stories now, major car makers say they are suing the U.S. government over import taxes on Chinese parts. The USA and China have imposed border taxes on each other's goods and services as part of a trade war. Tesla is the latest auto firm to object to custom duties slapped by the Trump administration and is demanding refunds. The car makers have filed a number of lawsuits in the past few days in the New York-based Court of International Trade. In its filing, Tesla said the tariffs are arbitrary, capricious, and an abuse of discretion. While Mercedes-Benz said the U.S. government is doing prosecution of an unlimited trade war affecting over $500 billion imports from China. Earlier, the World Trade Organization ruled that the United States tariffs on Chinese goods were inconsistent with international trade rules. Meanwhile, markets in Asia-Pacific are trading mixed over skepticism regarding a second wave of restrictions because of the resurgence of COVID-19. Stocks of major Australian banks jumped following changes to simplify credit access for consumers and small businesses. Australia's ASX 200 has climbed over 1%, while with the shares of banks surging over 5%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index is trading marginally higher. Mainland Chinese stocks have edged lower fractionally. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 and the Topix Index have gained close to 0.5%. South Korea's Kospi also advanced over 0.5%. Overall, the MSCI Asia ex-Japan Index edged higher fractionally. Now, Rafael Nadal is handed a tough path to this year's final at the Roland Garros after the draws were made for the Grand Slam. Nadal is seeking a record-extending 13th French Open title and a record-equaling 20th Grand Slam singles crown.
The Spaniard will take on Bulgaria's Igor Gerasimov in the first round and faces a potential last 8 clash with US Open runner-up Alexander Zverev. Nadal then faces a possible semi-final clash against last year's runner-up and US Open winner Dominic Thiem. Top seed Novak Djokovic of Serbia will face Swede Mikael Ymer in the first round. Swiss 16th seed and former champion Stan Wawrinka will take on Brighton Andy Murray in the hottest opener. Serena Williams will start her campaign against fellow American Christy Ann. Earlier, Canada's Milos Raonic and Switzerland's Belinda Bencic pulled out of the French Open.
Now let's have a look at the weather updates. Well, that is all for now. For the latest update, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.